It's going to be a longer form case study today about a couple who have just gone into aged care. Now, I've just finished up all of the advice with the couple yesterday. I actually visited them in the nursing home, and this one's a little bit different because they're both in their 70s. They both have full mental capacity. It's been tested by a lawyer. They've got all of the capacity with them, and it was a little bit more complex due to the other family members and the involvement of an estate lawyer. And the reason I also wanted to talk about this is that often financial planners talk about estate planning as just a will, and it's so much more than that, and this highlights that. So in this situation, a little bit of a sad story, and it's one of the things that I hate dealing with as part of my job, but I get this. This couple is aged in their 70s, and mentally they're all there, but due to some physical and illnesses, critical illnesses that they've had, one of them has really needed to go into a nursing home, and they're about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. So look, it didn't make any sense for them to stay apart. So the other one also did join, and the other partner also does have a few health issues. Might not really need an aged care facility, but for them to share a room, on their 49th year, it makes perfect sense. So when it came to first their entrance into aged care, the big question we had is, do we go on separate days or on same days or different days? Because one may be low means and the other wasn't. In this case, due to the actual pricing of this particular facility and their fee structure, they were actually better off going in on the same day. I know conventional wisdom a lot of the time does say that separate day entry is always best. Not in this case. So that had its own strategy there. And then we had to work out, well, what are we going to do with the former home? Because they had a very strong preference to keep it. They'd been in it for over 50 years, or thereabouts. So it made a lot of sense with the home. However, once we looked at the numbers, and they were in a position where they could keep it, but then we made that decision ultimately, it would be potentially best off selling the home. And they were presented with a number of options, and a choice was made to sell the home and then pay the RADs or bonds as you will. Where things got a little bit more complex with this one is they had a trusted family lawyer. They didn't have any children of their own, but they did have nieces and nephews, some with special needs too. So that's a whole other ballgame. We'll see how long this video gets. But one of the things that we found out is that, and talking through this couple who fully understand their finances, again, they're aged in their 70s and they're completely with it, is that the reason these clients were great is that we actually involved their estate lawyer, really good lawyer, and we actually talked about, well, whilst we can't give money away, the more money you have, it means less pension, because after they sold their home for quite a decent 7-figure amount, their pension was very significantly impacted even after the bond was paid. And so one of the things that we spoke about was, well, if one passes away and one will, then it's going to drive up the means tested care fee even further and reduce the age pension quite significantly for the surviving spouse. And we'd already looked after, once people are in aged care, for the most part, their expenses tend to be fairly limited. It's always good to have some cash flow to pay for whatever and have access to a cash reserve. However, I'm yet to see someone spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in aged care. Typically, it's all about what happens with the next generation. So we already did some significant planning around their superannuation, taxable components, even investments, reducing investment risk. As it happened, these clients they were orphaned from a bank. So they hadn't had financial advice in a while. So everything needed a good review. So anyway, we looked after all of that. But then one of the estate strategies that was put in place was that instead of bequeathing to each other, keeping in mind they had full capacity, they actually wanted to look after other family members. So things that fell into the estate, such as the RAD and some of the bank accounts, and we talked about how we could hold these certain assets in their name, that we could have their estate assets directly go to another family member, bypassing the surviving spouse who would already have a paid off RAD and certain other assets. We put an aged care annuity in place. So that would be ticking over, paying, and we had some numbers around that to make sure the surviving spouse would easily be looked after. So having a whole bunch of family members in a room where we had the sister of one of the people in there. We talked about the needs of the child. It's a nephew, as it will. And we had other external support members, and we also had the estate lawyer there talking through the mechanics of what would happen when one passed away, if it bypassed, and everyone was quite comfortable and the lawyer with the strategy. What that basically means is when one spouse passes away, instead of the surviving spouse receiving a whole bunch of funds, let's just call it, about $500,000 in RAD, plus this big aged care annuity, plus all of the cash, everything else, and then driving up all of those costs, it would then go to, get back in the screen, go to another family member. And then that's the only way to avoid, or the main only way to avoid gifting rules. So, and what I mean by that is, typically, you can't just give your money away and reduce your aged care costs and increase pension. However, if you do it through individually held assets, and you do it generally through a will, but you can also do this through non-estate assets, which we spoke about. We might not get into it in this strategy. Then what it does is it bypasses the surviving spouse. The surviving spouse, we also need to make sure they're absolutely looked after, which I think everyone in the room was very confident they would be. So when they would be left, and we had complete 50-50 position, so whoever the spouse was would be left with quite a lot of money, a paid off bond, and all of their needs looked after within reason. And again, all of us professionals, the lawyers and everyone else and myself, we felt very, very confident about the family members, and just that no one was being taken advantage of, and this was done over the course of about a year. So that strategy already, by putting that and a few of these other strategies in place, left them around $30,000 a year better off by mucking around with some of these numbers. And where the added complexity came in was that the person that they wanted to look after, both the sister of one of the people and her child with special needs, was, and this is an older adult child with special needs, is that both were receiving pensions, carers payments, disability pensions, which we also didn't want to impact. And being of that age too, with their sister, she was also concerned that with her son receiving all of this money, there is quite a bit of vulnerability that may come as part of this too, and wanted to make sure that was protected. I think I'm going to record a separate video just on the protections we can put in for adult children and just the ways we can protect their pensions and everything else. So that's one that comes up very regularly. But in a nutshell, this is a couple who moved into aged care from their family home, and through a series of decisions, what we did was, from an estate planning perspective, super important, we looked at how their will was basically changed so that the beneficiaries or who they were bequeathing their assets to changed in order to look after their surviving spouse. So the estate planning was so much more than just a will. It was how we structured their assets, which assets we held as estate assets, such as bank accounts, RADs, which assets were held in non-estate assets, such as aged care annuities with beneficiaries. What would happen after the person passed away? There were some second, third order impacts as part of this too. So putting all of this together, that was part of the estate plan. There was the standard financial plan, because they came with a suite of financial products that we needed to make sure were rearranged in the best possible way. And if I link that back to estate planning too, so that outside of a spouse, there weren't any significant taxes such as capital gains, super death tax, and these other things that came on. From an aged care perspective, enormous. Looking at the difference, I wasn't sure whether they'd be better off going same day, different day. It wasn't the intuitive answer that I thought. After I modelled out the numbers, we were very clear on this was actually the best strategy. There was also some negotiation with the nursing home to reduce their costs based on that, which also drove our decision making and the extra service fees that came with it. So quite a big complex strategy going on, but also a great example of what, one, case study of a couple going into aged care, but two, good estate planning in motion. And I've only shared maybe half, 3/4 of this story. So maybe might record another video after this about impacts on how to protect vulnerable adults when it comes to potential care and protect them from things like Centrelink and other means testing.